Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Are you ready for your parenting journey to be rocked? I am ready to help you out with this. Okay, so we have Kim Hopkins, who is going to be here today. And she is an independently licensed clinical social worker who has been specialized in working with kids for over 25 years. She has worked with the most challenging of behavior kids, kids that are in residential care, kids who have been hospitalized. She manages 2 clinical departments of 2 organizations serving youth and families in residential facilities, foster homes, therapeutic day schools, and homeless shelters. She has been a collaborative and proactive solutions CPS trainer since 2007, helping schools, residentials, facilities, hospitals, and parents to successfully implement the strategy. Ms. Hopkins is also the director of learning resources and support for Dr. Ross Greene's nonprofit Lives in the Balance. Okay, so I have to geek out for just a second. Dr. Ross Greene is a huge mentor of mine. I don't know that he knows this, but I have been following his work for as long as I have been a therapist and understanding what he is doing to help change parenting. I think that the CPS model is life-changing, and I'm so excited to introduce you guys to it today. With that, let's welcome Kim.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I have to admit, I kind of geek out on your approach for parenting because I feel like it works so well. So I'm so excited to share this with our audience because it has been really meaningful in my parenting journey.
That's great to know.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to jump into this. So your model basically is saying that kids do well if they can, which I think is different than what we generally look at in terms of parenting. Can you explain to us what that means exactly and how it shapes the approach to parenting and discipline when we think about kids doing the best that they can?
Sure. Kids do well if they can are the lenses we use to view kids' behavior.
Yes.
And we want to be thinking, if this kid could do well, they'd be doing well. They're not doing well. So what's getting in the way? Which is very different than how I was trained. I was trained the opposite, which is kids do well if they wanna. Yes. And if they want to do well, they do well. And if they don't feel like it, then they just don't pull it off. But, Dr. Greene, many, many decades ago, asked himself, why would kids not want to do well? And life doesn't go so great for them when they're not doing well. Sure, we suffer when they're not doing well, but they suffer even more, right? Mm-hmm. And so, he realized it's not about motivation, essentially, right? It's about skills. And there's lots of research that has nothing to do with his model that says, probably about 60 years worth, that says that kids are not doing well because they don't have the skills that they need, or they're not able to access those skills when they need them to pull off doing well. So we want to be thinking they do well if they could, they're not doing well, what could be getting in the way? And that takes us to skills. Are they struggling to access a particular skill they need in that moment? And then we look to make it predictable. What moments? When can we see that this is happening? Mm-hmm. And then we can craft interventions that are proactive and effective when we start there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, but it's so different even when I think about my childhood and how I was raised. It was kind of that thing that you talked about, that kids can do well and they just don't want to, or they're difficult on purpose, or they're trying to push our buttons, or they just are disrespectful, or whatever the verbiage is around that. But it's that this is intentional behavior to upset me as the grown-up, or to fail to do something that they should be able to do. And why are they not doing it? So then consequences, punishment. Like, let's get this together because clearly you need a motivator to make this happen. So the collaborative and proactive solutions model, which is the one that we're talking about today, Dr. Ross Greene created, right? And also with his organization, Lives in the Balance. So this is about a model that moves away from traditional discipline, probably how most people that are raising kids right now were raised. And that is the punishment rewards. Like, if you do this, then you get this. Or if you don't do this, then here is the punishment, and moves towards something that's more effective and compassionate. Can you talk about what that means exactly?
Sure. Well, when you are thinking kids do well if they wanna, you have one tool in your bag of tricks. It's called make them want it, right? In the ways
Mhm.
you just said. We're gonna reward the behaviors we like, we're gonna punish the ones we don't like in hopes of shaping this kid, right?
Mhm.
And then we kind of wonder why is it not working, right? Because they're not lacking motivation for doing well. They're struggling to access skills. So if we're thinking kids do well if they can, then we have this, oh, okay, I don't need the reward and punishment, the carrot and sticks, right? Because they already want to do well. What I need to figure out is what skills are they struggling to access and when is this happening so that I can work together with them. That's the collaborative part because they have, for many reasons, but they have insider information. We can't like see what's going on inside their brains. We can see how they feel, we can see their behavior, but we can't observe how they're perceiving a situation. So
Sure.
we do really want to partner with them so we can understand how are they perceiving this situation because we can tell it's not working. But if we can understand that, then we can help them solve the problem more durably, come to a solution that works for both of us, and then that's how we extinguish behavior. And it's very interesting. We don't have to focus on the behavior to extinguish it, which doesn't seem to make sense. And
No.
for
Yeah.
some, takes a leap of faith, but it
Mhm.
is absolutely what happens.
Yeah. Well, and it's frustrating, I think, like, as I'm thinking about being a parent hearing for this for the first time, you're like, no way, right? Like, excuse me, I've been, nice to my kid. I've been like guiding them. I've been compassionate. I've been supportive. Like, I want them to do well too, but they're just not. And I've told them how to do the skill and they're just not doing it. Do you find that
Right.
parents feel that way on when you're training too?
Oh, sure. Yes. And sometimes there's comparison of, well, my kid over here doesn't do it like that, but this kid does, right? And it's because, it's kind of confusing. Like, how come some kids come here less skilled than others? The research does not agree. Now, a lot of people want to point to trauma. Sure, we know that trauma results in, can result in changes in the brain and can mean that, kids end up struggling to access skills, but it's not 100% guarantee. And it's not the only thing,
Sure.
right? There's many kids who struggle to access skills in the absence of trauma, right? And
Mhm.
we don't know why. I have two kids. They are very different. One came here much more skilled than the other. And I would say their strengths in those skills are opposite. It's very interesting. Um, same DNA pool, same parents, same
Yeah.
household, and they're two very different kids. And we talk a lot about, playing the hand you've been dealt and being responsive to, who you have,
Mhm.
and understanding neurodiversity, and not necessarily just in the diagnostic realm, but we all think differently. Our
Sure.
brains work differently. It doesn't have to rise to the level of a diagnosis, right? But
Mhm.
there are ways that we perceive things differently than others, and sort of recognizing that and honoring that, so that we can help their brains work best for them so that we
Mhm.
can extinguish behavior.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so true. Like, when I think about, I have 4 children and they are absolutely 4 completely different humans. And although there are similarities, there are vast differences. And it can be so frustrating when I look at their chronological age and I'm like, okay, why can the 3-year-old do this, but the other kids cannot? And it's like, that is so frustrating to be like, okay, why is this kid getting this and you guys continue to do this same thing? Or it's like, thinking to myself, like, okay, I tell everybody, clean up after yourself, like pick up your trash, right? Like, and then sometimes they do it and sometimes they don't. And, it's like, what is the difference? Like, what is going on? And I think sometimes, well, oftentimes in parenting, what we don't recognize is a lot of it is about us, right? Like it's about the parent and how we come to the problems too. And we often just are like, okay, this is a kid behavior. Or like, I noticed the other day, I can't remember what the situation was, but my kids were getting like grumpy at each other and they were like yelling, which is something that we don't do a lot of yelling in our house. I mean, people get mad at each other, but like not a lot of yelling. And I came from a yelling house, so I do really hard work to not yell. But then I realized that day that I had been just like, it was just a hard day for me. And so I had definitely been raising my voice more. And then my kids were echoing that. And I was like, dang it. Right. Like I could recognize that in myself too. So I think, it's what is getting in the way. And sometimes as the parents, our behavior is also getting in their way. Do you see that could be true?
Well, I'm thinking about we have a Facebook group for families. I think it's at 110,000 members at this point, maybe more. And I learned in there many years ago, a parent posted, I like to think that my kid is not giving me a hard time. They're having a hard time. And kind of just that. And I loved it so much. Parenting's a hard gig. I try to remember,
Yes.
when I'm with my own kids, like, okay, so this feels like you're giving me a hard time, but you're not. You're just having a hard time. And then recognizing that I might not be in space to help them the way they need to be helped. And that would be okay. We can just kind of hit pause until I'm in better space, because a lot of
Yes.
it is, if you're approaching a situation thinking my kids, would do well if they wanted to, you're going to get upset at behavior. You're going to there's going to be a rise out of you, right? And you're going to reach for the make them wanna tool, right? Which
Yes.
can come with, whatever it looks like, raising voices or taking video games or whatever that is, right? As opposed to, okay, my kid is having a hard time. What could this be about? Because I know this is not what they want. It's not willful and intentional. They don't want me to be upset. They don't want to be upsetting their siblings. They don't want, right? So what is this about? What is hard about this? We had a situation just yesterday in our house where we were going to go out to breakfast, and we don't do it a lot. My son struggles, I think, for a variety of reasons. I think he thinks like he's not going to get enough to eat and there's not going to be things that he likes. He's 9 and he's a little picky, and now he's got some food allergies too that we have to worry about. But we had that all planned out. Going to a place he knew he liked, he knew they had stuff saved for him that he liked, right? Yet he still had a little bit of a meltdown in the morning when we were leaving. And at first I was like, oh gosh, like I thought I took care of all the things, right?
Yeah.
But then when I couldn't listen right away. So I just sort of removed myself. But then when I could listen, come to find out it had nothing to do with the usual stuff, because we did solve that. It had something to do with he has an Amazon Alexa in his room, and she wasn't listening to him, and she wasn't like able to turn the lights off or something like he wanted, and that's what was making it. But I didn't know that until I was able to listen. So then we could figure that out. It's really hard for him when that computer thing doesn't do what he wants her to do. And I didn't realize that. So now we have something new to work on.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I like that perspective of like, you are kind of a detective in this model of parenting. Our job is to be a detective to figure out what are the things that are getting in the way of our kids being successful. Because if we're operating from this framework, all kids want to be successful. All kids want to do well. And so if that's the case, then it's our job as parents or caregivers or people who love kids, right? Even teachers can apply this strategy, is what is getting in the way, right? Like, what is the problem? And then figuring that out. Okay, so we're going to have to get some people to buy into this, because I know that, our how we were raised, consequences seem to be the thing that gets people to buy in. And obviously this model is saying that is not the most effective route, and it doesn't really work. But I think there are caregivers out there and parents who are going to say, we have to give consequences or they won't learn accountability. They're not going to learn how to do this. And so how does this model address this concern that kids can be responsible even without consequences, and this method is not using fear or shame?
Yeah, I worried about the accountability piece too, because I learned this model before I was a parent. I was working in residential care with some of the most challenging kids you will ever meet that had been to jail and been to locked hospital settings. And so accountability was big for us, right? We also recognized that what we were doing wasn't working, and we were able to hold the kids accountable in some very, very strong ways. Back then in residential care, a lot was allowed that's not allowed today and shouldn't be. Um, and yet we would scratch our heads like, why isn't this working long term?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I'm losing my train of thought, of course, because there's 6 different things I want to say about this.
So about just, people worrying about accountability, right?
Right.
And then I also put
So
in the part of shame and fear, right? As
yeah,
managing
so we have
strategies.
to
Yeah.
really think about our definition of accountability. So we were taught that holding a kid accountable is like, if they do something we don't like, they got to feel that it's not okay.
Yes.
Right. So they got to feel it. It's
Yes.
got to be unpleasant. They got to serve a sentence. Right. But it turns out that just tells kids what you did, we did not like, which they knew it before they did it. So we're actually not doing anything with that definition of accountability. Right. Because kids learn right from wrong. Right. And there's lots of ways to teach right from wrong that does not require punishment. Right. But that's what consequences teach, right from wrong. Punishment teaches right from wrong. But it wasn't that they didn't know it wasn't right. It was for something else. They already knew we would be unhappy. Mm-hmm. So we had to really take a look at that definition of accountability and realize that the CPS model holds kids accountable in a much more durable way, where you're asking them to help you understand their perspective on a situation. In essence, how did it get there, right? Like, what was happening for you during this time that we were wanting you to be doing this? What was happening? What didn't work about this? Then they need to hear our perspective.
Okay.
Then they need to work with us, partner with us together to figure out a solution, essentially, so it goes better next time. Then we try the solution, right? We see how it goes. And we come back and either it's worked and behavior's extinguished, or we learned that it didn't quite get the job done. So what do we learn from that? Then we tweak it and we try something else. That is a much higher form of accountability in my mind. I would also add that a lot of parents worry about, well, what's going to happen when they leave my house, like out there, right? The world is very much about the short-sighted version of accountability. Yes, and there's actually a lot more gray out there than we realize. And, consequences and punishments, teach us to go, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, right? And is that required of us in the world? Sure, you might have a boss that's rigid and inflexible, or have a run-in with the police, right? And we actually, in those situations, rely far more on our flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem-solving skills than we do on our yes, sir, yes, ma'am skills as adults, if we think about that, right? And so, if we're using a punishment, we're just teaching, you just got to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and forget everything else. Versus if we look at this new version of accountability, there's going to be room to grow their skills for flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, and problem solving, because struggling to access those is why they had the behavior in the first place. So we'll give them chances to grow those skills that they're going to rely on more out in the real world anyway. Mm-hmm.
So what I hear you saying is, if we utilize this parenting model, then we're actually teaching our kids to kind of solve problems better as they are just going through life, even tomorrow, right? By breaking down the problem, seeing what the barriers are, and then that may allow them to talk us through what got in the way, and then to do it better the next time, or to, as they're in a situation, maybe they know, like, okay, my boss is going to be upset if I don't turn this in. So maybe proactively, they would say, hey, I had this thing come up and I know we have this deadline tomorrow. And I wanted to know if there's any flexibility here, or could we meet first thing in the morning to talk about where I'm at because I'm getting stuck on this or I'm having trouble. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, rather than calling out, right? And just avoiding it. But yes, we're going to give them practice solving problems, experience solving problems. My son needs help solving the problem that the silly computer doesn't listen to, because it caused a major behavior, right? Yeah. So he needs help solving it when something doesn't go as expected. And it is a skill to be able to flex and adapt and manage frustration and problem solve that. And I know that he doesn't do well with that all the time. We've made a lot of inroads in his 9 years, but still more to go. So we need to help him solve that problem so that the behavior doesn't happen. While we do that, we're actually going to be teaching him a problem solving process. He's going to get experience in all kinds of skills that are needed to function out there. Because eventually I want to be fired as the problem solving tour guide, right?
Yes.
I'm going to need to be. He's not always going to be with me. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think, what I hear parents talk about in terms of like consequences is like, if you don't pay your bill on time, like nobody's going to be flexible with you on that. And if you don't, like these adult skills, right? Of like, but what I've actually learned is that yes, there can be a consequence to that. But if we teach our kids how to address conflict, then they're more likely to engage it versus avoid it. And so if I can't pay my water bill on time and I call the water company and I say, hey, here is something that's going on in my life. And I was wondering if there's any flexibility here. And they might say, sure, we'll give you a 30-day grace period. Right. But you don't know if you don't ask. And I think because of our punishment mindset, we want to like avoid the punishment, even though it may be coming anyways, right? That consequence part from society. Right. And so we don't want to like bring up like, hey, I'm struggling with this thing. A lot of times, obviously, this is after kids recognize the value of their parent being their ally versus their drill sergeant, maybe, and that we are working together to solve this because like I have a vested interest as your mom in helping you to get through this because I don't want you to struggle. I mean, like when my kids struggle, it feels awful for me as a parent. Now I know they are going to struggle. That is life. And I can't solve all the problems for them, right? Like that's not the job, is to solve it for them, right? Like we're teaching them how to solve the problem. And we're just that support system. We're like the guardrail to help them operate in this space of having success.
Yeah. And I think a lot about how sometimes we confuse natural and unnatural consequences. Natural consequences are literally those things that we have no input in. They happen without us, right? If you are mean to another child and that child doesn't want to play with you, I have nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
That's a natural consequence. But if you made a mess in the kitchen and I say you need to clean up the mess and I call that a natural consequence, it is not, because I'm imposing it, right? So really making that distinction of natural versus unnatural consequences. Now, as much kids will want to not have the true natural consequences come, it's not enough for them to be able to suddenly be good at solving problems, right?
Sure.
It's the skills piece that's missing. And they'll breathe a sigh of relief when they can avoid the natural consequences because they now have skills to call upon that they need to manage different situations, right? So absolutely.
Yeah. And this is hard because we're going to have to grow as a parent. If you're going to use this really effective strategy, like you're going to have to totally shift your mindset as a parent to do this job differently. So this isn't something that I was thinking about asking you, but it just came to my mind now. So like, what if one parent buys into this process and another does not, right? So we've got one person who's like, I'm going to keep using my traditional consequence punishment format, right? Of like, I'm imposing consequences, I'm imposing punishments on you, and I'm just going to do the yes, ma'am, yes, sir strategy. And then one who's like, I kind of want to do this collaborative parenting thing. I want to see how it works. Is that possible within a household?
I think it largely starts out that way. Yes. And I would even say, I mean, I've been using this model for, I don't know, 24 years or something like that. My husband, he's an engineer. He's not a clinical social worker, right? And so even it's less and less over time as he's seen the effectiveness with our kids, and does not come naturally to him at all. And so I think it definitely can be something that co-parents work together on. I think it's often that one is starting and the other is not. And then we start to see like, whoa, wait a minute, our child is gravitating more toward you because you're partnering with them and helping them solve a problem. And I'm just telling them what they're doing is wrong and making them feel it, right? The relationship is going to be interesting to watch between the two. We actually have a video on our YouTube channel of a father who shared his story of how the model changed his household. And he was a holdout until things got real bad. And then he went, well, I guess I'm just going to give this a try because I see how well it's working for my wife and our son, right? And then he talks about that journey. It's very powerful. And so it starts that way a lot. And then I think when people see that it's not the same as letting your kids do whatever they want, that is actually not the model, right? And the parent who's holding out has concerns. Like there's a reason they're holding out. There's worries.
Yes.
So if we can be dialoguing about that and understanding what the worries are and address them, which is actually doing the model together, because this model is not just for parents to kids.
I know. I was just thinking, I was like, you're using the model on the spouse. Yes. Or the co-parent. Yes.
Yeah. So it definitely typically starts out that way. And then it's important to be in dialogue about, well, what are the worries if you're not jumping in with 2 feet? What are you worried about? Like, what do you think could happen that you don't want to have happen? And we can be working that through. My husband and I have many conversations like that because we were both raised very traditionally, and him more so than me, I would say. And sometimes he has trouble realizing that didn't actually do him any favors, and that there's a more effective, compassionate way to do things. And I would also say, when parents are like, well, I was raised the traditional way and I'm fine, kind of thing. We get that a lot. I was raised the traditional way too. I'd also like to think I'm fine. And I would say that my parents, love them dearly, they missed that I had a glaring skills deficit. I was, much like my son, unable to handle it when the plan changed. So like, we would have a plan to maybe go roller skating. And then Saturday would come and the plan would get changed to the movies for whatever reason. I actually liked the movies better, but my brain would not make the shift and I would have a behavior. Now I was lucky in how I expressed that. Some kids are lucky in their behavior expression, or we call it their frustration response or their stress response, their behavior signal. I was like a crier sulker, right? And so my parents kind of read that as, well, she just wants her own way. And because kids do well if they wanna, right? And then there was a punishment. What they missed was that I had a hard time handling it when the plan changed. So then I became an adult. By the way, you turn 18, you're not gifted skills that you struggled to access before.
Yes.
Right. And I'm managing the clinical departments of 12 programs. I have to put out fires all the time. My plan changed all the time. And I wasn't crying and sulking over it, but I would become anxious and like short and like snippy and not have patience. And that didn't work very well in a work setting.
Yes.
I also noticed it in my relationship with my now husband, right? And had they had different thinking, they would have caught it. They would have realized like it actually doesn't matter if we're changing from a less preferred activity to a more preferred activity. It's the change for her. It's just handling change is hard, and helping me to come up with a solution to address that. Which once I found Dr. Greene's model, I did come up with a solution to address it. And now I would not say it's something I struggle to do because my solution has been well practiced for years. But we miss things, you know? So are we fine? I'm glad. And I could have had a little bit of an easier road, right?
Yeah.
Now we think about kids who are not so lucky as me, right? Yeah. My daughter's lucky like me. She's a crier sulker, but my son's a little less lucky. He's a screamer hitter thrower.
Mm-hmm.
Kids I worked with in residential care, they were hurting themselves. They were trying to hurt other kids. They were trying to hurt us. They were running into traffic, doing all kinds of things, right? Very unlucky. But the interesting thing is where the kid falls on that lucky spectrum doesn't change the intervention. It's all the same, whether they're crying and sulking or they're taking a swing at somebody, the message is the same. There was a problem I didn't know how to handle. I didn't have the skills. I couldn't access the skills to solve it. So I do what I do when that happens, you know, and some kids cry and sulk and some kids take a swing at you and they're telling you the same thing, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I'm kind of thinking, you know, I know that in some states, like spanking or, you know, like you can use a stick that is this long and there's like laws around those kind of things, which, you know, I'm thinking about if parents are not responding in their feelings, right? So if we're not responding to a situation in our feelings, and we have access to the tools that we have gained, then we're not going to use that strategy too, because we're like, what is going on? Like, because parents will say like, well, you know, like at first, you know, if you spank your kid, then it feels better. And I'm like, oh, it's not supposed to be about that, right? Like, I mean, spanking is not effective. It just doesn't work. We have tons of research to support that spanking physical punishment does not ever work. But I think it's like they don't have the skills, right, to handle that change in behavior, or they had an expectation of their kid following the direction and then they didn't. And that adult doesn't have the skills to handle that kid's behavior. And I think, you know, I've been a therapist for 16 years now, 17 years. I don't know. I've lost track a lot of years. And, you know, I have all these skills, but sometimes, you know, my childhood like pops up in my head, even though I'm fighting against those behaviors of like, I didn't like that. Like, I didn't like being spanked. I wasn't spanked a lot of times, but I hated it to the point where this makes me kind of laugh. I would get newspaper and put them in my pants if I knew that I was going to get spanked because I didn't want to be spanked. Like it hurt. But it made me not want to connect with my parent, right? Like it made me feel like we were on opposing teams, and that didn't teach me anything except for sometimes it made me hate myself. And that is a sad side effect to the punishment model, is that it just it doesn't necessarily change the behavior, but then that kid knows that what they're doing is wrong over and over, and then they just start hating themselves. And then that takes us down a whole path of like undesirable behaviors, because if you hate yourself and you feel like no one loves you, it doesn't matter how much you say I love you. Our actions a lot of times speak way louder than our words do. And I think kids then can internalize that and go down this path of they find themselves in residential care, right? Or they're in a inpatient hospital because they just can't manage what is going on. But I was just thinking when you were saying that, like it's parents building skills too. And I think that's hard when we're an adult. Sometimes we just want to be at the place where like, okay, I'm 40 years old. I should know these things by now. But it's okay if you don't. It's okay if you don't have the skills yet. And just because you had a baby does not mean you're gifted the skills. I mean, at least that's how it is in my life, is like I'm still learning as a parent. I'm learning daily on things that I can do better to help support my kids and to support myself too.
Oh yeah. And you know, I think that there's a lot of blame that comes parents' way if your kids are acting out at school or in the community, right? You're looked at like you're not doing something right. And all that you said and that combined makes it hard for parents. And, you know, this type of alternative is not quite in the mainstream yet. It's getting there, which is great. But usually if your kid's misbehaving and you're doing the carrots and sticks thing, the advice you get is, well, you got to find a bigger stick or a bigger carrot. You know, you got to make the punishment bigger. It's got to be more, it's got to be swifter. It's got to be, you know, I don't know, right? Like just all different versions of that traditional stuff. Now you're raised that way, so you're thinking that's the way to do it,
Yes.
and it's not working. So now you're getting blamed, right?
Mhm.
So everybody's feeling like they're not cutting it. Your child is feeling like they're not cutting it. You're feeling like, so no wonder why I think our Facebook group for parents has so many posts, because
Yes, we need help. Yes.
yes, find community, find like-minded community, find
Yes.
people who don't question, well, why are you doing it this way? If that were my kid, I would just be taking the car away. Okay, well, that's an option. That might not get us where we need to go. And it is going to have the side effect of, like you so eloquently explained, adversaries. Do we want to be adversaries with our kids? If we are, that does not breed honesty. They're not coming to us
Yes.
for help when they mess up. They are not
Mhm.
coming to us for help. And my household that I grew up in, very traditional, I'm one of 7. We didn't go to our parents when we needed their help the most, right? Because we were trying to avoid the consequence.
Yes.
The I told you so's, the now you can't do this or now you can't do that, right? And I'm really trying. I mean, I try to say to my daughter, she's turning 15 in a couple weeks, and I say to her regularly, "Oh, you will mess up. You're going to do something I'll be very unhappy about. And guess what? I'm going to get over it. I would rather us figure out if there's something you need help with. I'd like to help you. That's what it's about. I'm not, and I've even, because I'm human, right? And especially when I was pregnant with my son and I was sick all the time, the traditional stuff would come out of my mouth sometimes. So I wrote down and signed for her, you're never really in trouble. It's just me not managing my frustration well. I will get over it. Right. And because I don't want her to avoid me if something's happening that she actually needs help with, especially with social media, and I mean, when we were growing up, as if drinking and drugs was not enough. Now we've got all this other stuff too.
It's so hard to be a teen. Yes. I mean, it's hard to be a kid, but I mean, yes, the teenage, there's a lot of additional pressure.
Right.
Yes.
And I don't want her thinking, well, if I go to you for help, you might help me, but then you're going to punish me too. No, if you've done something I wish you didn't do, it's because you need help. That's what you're telling me.
Yes.
Right. And that's kids do all they can perspective.
Yes. Yes. So different than our traditional parenting protocol, right? Okay, so talk to me if you find a kid is repeatedly struggling with the same behavior, right? And I think for parents that can be a really hard one, is that they are we've talked about this, or we worked through this, but you keep doing it. So how does the CPS model guide us to identify what's really going on? Because we're probably missing something if we keep doing the same behavior, right?
Well, the thing about focusing on the behaviors, it tricks us, right? So when kids have their behavior signal, right? Hitters hit, kickers kick, screamers scream. But they're hitting and kicking and screaming for a variety of reasons. So if we just focus on the fact that you kicked, even though we said you can't kick your brother and you continue to do it, we're missing the boat. We're just looking at the signal. We're looking at the smoke signal. We need to be we call it going upstream. We got to figure out, well, what pushed them in the water in the first place? When they're in the water is when they're doing the kicking, right? But what pushed them in, and what we find up there were problems that they didn't have what they needed to solve. In other words, expectations that they weren't able to access the skills they needed to meet, right? And that is very predictable. We can predict, and we have a tool to help you do it, when your child will land in the water or do their behavior signal. What are the times you've seen that? And with help, parents can often identify, even when it feels like it's all day long, right? They can identify, oh, well, it's every time they're watching TV and the sibling comes in and sits on the couch and starts talking to them. That's a great predictable situation that we know is not going to go well. We can work on that, right? Great, let's list that out. Well, it's also every time that they're asked to take the trash out on Tuesdays. Great, let's write that down. Right, so we can get very specific and predictable about the expectations the environment or other people place on the kid that's likely going to make it so that they're kicking, if they're kickers, right? So we want to be working before the kicking happened.
Yes.
What was it they had trouble handling? Because that's where we're going to focus our intervention. If we can help them solve the problem, that it's difficult to take the trash out on Tuesdays, if we can help them solve that, and it doesn't mean don't ask them to take the trash out. That's not actually the model. There might be reason to do that temporarily if you have a lot of bigger fish to fry. We say you can't work on everything all at once.
Sure.
But if we solve the problem, difficulty taking out the trash, and we figure out what's hard for them, maybe it's about the smell, maybe they don't like touching it. Like, if that's the case, we can do something about it, and also ensure that they're pitching in and helping out and taking care of the fact that I don't have time to do all the chores. Right? They can meet our concerns too, but we'd like to meet theirs, and then we'll have less kicking because now the trash is going better. So now we're not kicking during that time, right? So that's kind of how it goes. We use our assessment of skills and unsolved problems to take our best guess of what skills we think our child is struggling to access. And we're just taking good guesses here because, again, we can't see into their brains. And then get real specific about when we see this happening. When does this play out? What are all the examples we can think of? Situations they don't handle well or expectations they don't meet. Now, once we've made them predictable to us, we can get ahead of all this. And that's the proactive part of the model. The best time to solve the trash issue is not Tuesday night when I've just asked you to take it out and you're kidding. No. That's not the best time to solve it. The best time to solve it is any day but Tuesday, probably, or maybe Tuesday morning, right? But it's outside of the heat of the moment. And that can only happen if we make kids predictable so that we can decide, okay, what are we working on first, second, third, and then making time in these proactive moments to work on solving the problem.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is if parents are listening to this and they're like, okay, how do I actually get into this model? So one of the first things you're doing is figuring out when your kid struggles predictably. Like there is a reoccurring issue, like they're always getting out of bed after you put them to bed, or they're always fighting with their siblings after school, or they, like you said, don't want to take out the trash. So we identify those situations. And then how do we figure out how to kind of disarm that part? Like, how do we go upstream to figure out what skills they're missing?
Well, first, the skills part we're going to look at first, and we're just going to sort of take our best guess because there's a lot of skills that research tells us our kids are struggling to access when they're doing their concerning behavior.
Can you give us some examples of those behaviors or the skills that they might be lacking?
We don't list all of them on there because it's not really necessary, but we list the most frequent. So difficulty maintaining focus, difficulty persisting on challenging or tedious tasks, difficulty with interoception or sensory stuff, or and there's language ones, there's emotion ones, there's cognitive thinking ones. There's lots of different skills on there. Mine, difficulty handling an unpredictable situation, unpredictability, ambiguity, difficulty handling it when the plan or routine changes, right? So there's lots of different skills that we hope you'll recognize your kid in, right? And take your best guess of, I think this could be what they struggle with. That's the easy part. The second part is coming up with those examples of when this plays out, because the wording that we use is important. Because the way we list it on our list, those are the words we're going to use when we go to problem solve this with your child. And so we want that conversation to get off the ground, right? These are conversation starters. So they're not going to be behavior focused. We're going to switch it to, well, what would we expect to happen? So rather than saying, you're not getting along with your brother at the dinner table, that's behavior. I want to switch it to, well, how should that go? Oh, difficulty talking nicely with your brother when you're sitting together at the dinner table, right? And there could be several things at dinner that don't go well. Maybe they don't try new food. So difficulty trying the salmon we had last week, or as a nice specific example of all the times we're worried about that. So what's nice too about this, different families have different expectations of their kids, and this allows for that because culturally relevant, right? Plus being responsive to who you have and what's meaningful to your family. We do not prescribe what your expectations should be. We like realistic expectations.
Sure.
Other than that, your expectations are yours. We just want you to word them in a way that takes out the behavior and it's nice and specific, because these are conversation starters. You want to use words that your kid will have a shot of understanding. And you also don't want to ask them about everything. Like, I wouldn't say to a kid, you seem to have difficulty getting homework done. I just asked about too many things at once. I know this child has done no homework all school year, and here it is May, right? And I want to solve it all. Well, we're going to solve it, but we really do want to take a kind of a specific recent example. So I would split homework at least by subject. But even then, like even in math, your word problems are a little different than equations, right? So I might actually say, difficulty completing your word problem math assignment last week, difficulty completing your double-digit division equations for homework last week. I would list them separately because they couldn't be a little different. And that's the thing about behavior. It all looks the same because we just refuse to do it. It's a refusal behavior, but it could be for different reasons, especially when it comes to homework, because, even within one subject, it's requiring different skills and strategies. So, we want to list unsolved problems specifically, get the behavior out. We won't use any theories. We all have theories about what's going on. We think, we have some ideas about why this expectation is hard for our kid to meet it. And that will come into play, but we don't want to lead with that.
Okay.
We want to open the door to that conversation as wide as we can and see what your child tells you. And we often say, be prepared for surprises, because in the first step of Plan B, where we're doing a lot of listening, it's the empathy step, but it's really like the ask the kid step. We're doing a lot of listening, and that's because we often guess wrong. Even though we know our kids well, we cannot understand always what their brain is doing in the midst of certain expectations. So we're trying to understand that. And sometimes we're like, oh, I had no idea you were thinking that, right?
Yeah.
And that's good to know, because that will help us help them solve the problem.
Okay, so can you lay out, so after we've identified what skill is lacking, then we're looking at specific behaviors, then we're rephrasing it to make sure that it's something that will allow for a good conversation, that they are able to understand, but also don't feel like attacked, right? Or that we're criticizing them. And then we're listening. So how would we bring that up to them? Like, let's say, I noticed that on Tuesdays, you're struggling with taking out the trash.
That's exactly how I would say it. And then I would, we call this proactive Plan B for short, or proactive CPS. I've noticed that is the way to start it. Then you're going to take your well-worded unsolved problem that doesn't have behavior in it or theory and is nice and split and specific, put it in, and then end with some sort of inquiry. We like, what's up? You don't have to use that. You can say, fill me in, or tell me about that. Mm-hmm. So I've noticed that it's been difficult for you to take the trash out on Tuesdays. What's up? Would be a great idea, would be a great starter. You can substitute any of the nicely worded examples of unsolved problems that we came up with. I've noticed that's been difficult for you to get started on your math fractions homework last week. What's up? I've noticed it's been difficult for you to talk nicely to your brother while you're sitting at the dinner table. What's up? I've noticed it's been difficult for you to try new foods like the salmon we had last week. What's up?
Mm-hmm. And then what do we do?
It's important. I like we listen, and
yes.
Because kids, now lots of different things can happen, right? They might start talking, which is great. That's the goal. If they communicate with mouth words, we want them using them, because that will help us, more quickly understand their perspective. So the kid might talk, but they're not going to say, well, I'm glad you asked. Here's what's happening. I'm having trouble reading social cues, and right. That's not, they're not going to say that. They're just going to say something like, I don't like it. Right. Now that's talking, but it's very surface. So then it's time to drill for information. And we have a resource on our website. It's called a drilling cheat sheet. It's the 8 ways we like to ask neutral, non-judgmental questions. So we're having this air of curiosity. We really want to know what's happening. If we can't help if we don't understand. So we really are trying to understand. And the first step, the empathy step, takes some time for that reason, because we might have to work hard to understand. Now, if you have a kid who doesn't talk, you get a shoulder shrug, you get an I don't know, you wait it out a little bit, you try asking it differently, you don't get anywhere. We've got resources too. We have call it a Plan B cheat sheet, and that's essentially the 3 steps of the CPS model and what could go wrong and different ways of addressing it. But if you have a kid who's kind of giving you a shoulder shrug, I'm thinking, what kind of shoulder shrug is this? Is this I don't know, I know, but I'm not telling you? Mm-hmm. In which case, this might be a kid who's had a lot of experience with traditional discipline, and that trust has eroded a little bit and might need to be reminded that this is different than what we usually do, that this is not what we would call Plan A or traditional discipline. This is not me telling you what to do. I'm not saying you have to. I'm not saying you've done something wrong. I'm just asking you what you think about it and what's hard for you. I'd really like to know, right? So letting them know very clearly that this is not traditional discipline. Is this a shoulder shrug or an I don't know? That's like, I have no idea because I've never thought about this before. So they might need some wait time and some patience, right? Maybe come back to it. Or it could be an I don't know. I know, but I don't have the words to tell you, because it is a skill to put your thoughts, needs, and concerns into words. And even kids who are very verbal sometimes struggle to pick the words they need to explain what's happening for them. You are their partner in that case, and you could take some guesses, about what could be hard about, getting the math fractions worksheet done for homework. What are all the things that might not work well about that? And they can rate your guesses. They don't even have to use words to respond if that would make it easier for them. And that's
so maybe like a thumbs up, thumbs down, in the middle kind of deal.
Yep. And then we also teach a 5-finger method, which is like a Likert scale. So 5 is totally true and 1 is not true at all, and we define them all. There's a visual on our website as well, but you can simplify it to the thumbs. You can say point to the pink elephant if I'm right, point to the yellow giraffe if I'm wrong, right? So there's lots of different ways to gather information, but we need to gather information in that first step. Now, for kids who maybe don't communicate with mouth words, there are ways to meet them where they're at in terms of how they do communicate. And, sometimes we rely a lot on words because we use words, right? But there are lots of other ways of communicating that has nothing to do with words. It's could be even more meaningful and stronger than words. So you can use pictures, devices, however that kid communicates, we can flex the model, because we really do want to ask them and we really do want to understand, even if they're real little. We really want to do this, right? Once we understand, once we kind of have this light bulb, okay, now I see how this is happening or what's so challenging for you, right? Now we're moving on to the second step, which is actually much shorter than the first step. The second step is the define adult concern step. We're just going to say a sentence, because we're not lecturing here, about why the expectation is important to us. With the homework one, it might be because, we're worried about you falling behind in your learning. Now, if you notice, I didn't say, well, you have to do your homework, because that's a repeat of the expectation. And I started with the expectation. I don't need to repeat it now. I want to say what my worry is if it doesn't happen, or why is it so important to me? And usually it's hard for us sometimes to figure out our worries or our concerns, but they usually come from either a health place, a safety place, a learning place. That's typically where our expectations come from, 90% of the time. So one sentence, short and sweet, about our worry, right? And then we move on to the third step, the invitation step, where we're going to work together to come up with a solution. It's got to meet 2 criteria, though. It's got to be feasible, meaning doable. We think we can pull it off, right? And it's a we, not you, kid, can you do it? It's a we, right? This is a partnership. And it's got to be mutually satisfactory, meaning it addresses the kid's concern we learned in the first step, and the adult's concern we learned in the second step. And so the entrance into the third step is a repeat of both sets of concerns because we're really clearly lining up. Because remember, yep, we're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to solve this expectation, but we're also teaching them a process for solving problems. So it's a little repetitive, but embrace it because there's a lot going on here without us even thinking about it. I wonder if there's a way we can do something about you feeling like you don't know what you're doing with the fractions, and that's very frustrating, in such a way that we also meet my concern about you not falling behind in your learning. Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas? So we're trying to say, what can something can work for you and for me, not just for one of us. Mm-hmm. It's got to be for both, and that's really key. Now, when we say, do you have any ideas? That's always interesting because some kids are good at considering multiple solutions to a problem. It's on the assessment. Some kids are not. And they might need you again as the partner to come up with something that meets the criteria and has a shot of working. And we agree to try it and come back and see if it worked. And if it didn't, sometimes it doesn't. We learn from it, make a tweak, try again.
Okay. And then we can keep repeating that process until we have found a solution that is working for both of us.
Yeah. And you're not working on, you might have a child that has 40 or 50 unsolved problems, right? Yes. 40 or 50 examples of when you see their behavior signal, right? And you're not going to be able to work on that all at once.
Yes.
We say pick your big fish, pick 1 or 2 or 3 things. Those are separate conversations though, to work on at a time. Get one solved. That's solved. Then you take on a new one. In the meantime, and this is also why it's important to do that assessment of skills and unsolved problems, because you want a complete list, because the ones you're not working on, you're going to need to figure out what you're doing. If I'm not working on, the difficulty getting along with your brother at the dinner table and they're hurting each other, but I'm not working on it because I have bigger fish to fry, I'm not just going to let that happen, right? For all of our sakes. So I'm going to say to my kid, and this is a very transparent model. I like to tell kids in whatever way they can understand all aspects of it. And so I would say something like, we're working on, some bumps in the road you hit during the course of your day, right? We're not going to work on the dinner time stuff right now because I think we have bigger fish to fry. So in the meantime, we'll get there. Don't worry, we will work on it. In the meantime, what could dinner time look like for you so that it's not a hard place for you and it's not a hard place for your brother or for us, right? What could that look like? And maybe, you agree on it together, but maybe the kid is eating at a different time than everyone else. That's obviously not what you want if that's not your expectation, and yet it's temporary. How do we reduce the temperature in this house and get some breathing room? Because we are working on other things. We're just not working on this right now.
Yes.
So while we're not working on it, how do we call it Plan C it? Plan C is not the model, but we like it because it puts expectations that we know our kid cannot meet reliably, puts them on ice because we're working on other ones. Once we have room, right? No more than 3 at a time again, then we'll say, okay, we're not going to Plan C that anymore. Now we're going to work on it and figure out what's going on at the table and address it. So a lot of parents, get worried when they hear about Plan C because there's so much pressure that we're supposed to pursue all of our great expectations. That's how we have positive influence with our kids. And here's the thing, if you have a kid who has a lot of expectations they can't reliably meet, you cannot pursue them all at once. You're just going to get their behavior signal, which you then have to deal with. So we're big fans of expectation management. So you're not engaging in behavior management.
Yes. Which is really hard. Like you said, I mean, you want to solve things. And I think anybody thinking about anything they want to change in their life, if we put too many things in front of us, we just kind of give up. Right. Yeah. We're like, okay, whatever. I can't meet that. So our kids are going to feel exactly the same, if not more intensity around that, because if they're lacking skills and our job is to teach them those skills, if we're like, okay, we're going to cover 50 things. I mean, as a parent, I'm going to feel overwhelmed, right? Because I'm like, okay, we're doing this and we're doing this and right. And so that's going to be overwhelming for me. So I'm probably going to go back to old behaviors on my side if like it's that, cycle of like, we have to break the cycle somehow. And I think
Right.
it seems like the first step is to find 1, 2, or 3 behaviors, right? And skill deficits that we're lacking, that we're going to work on, that are specific things, that's really the beginning. I don't know that, like, sometimes with some models you can find like, okay, here's one thing you could implement, like just do this one thing. But I think with this model, we really need to look at where our deficits are, how we see that problem showing up, and to work with our kids on finding a solution.
Yeah. The one thing is really get that ASIP filled out.
Yeah.
Get that, because that becomes your roadmap, right? And what's interesting is all those skills are at the root of all this. They're not the focus of the intervention, because it would be very hard for me to say to a kid, sometimes I notice you have difficulty reading social cues. That's not going to go well. But if I'm picking an example of when I see that play out, like you have difficulty agreeing with your brother on what to watch for TV, right? That's more tangible for both of us to have that conversation. So tons of skills are baked into the 3 steps of the model, but we don't have to focus on them, and you don't know how you have to teach them, because this is not direct skills training. It's experiential skills training.
Yes.
So you're getting the experience with a bunch of different skills, and eventually, if you've had enough doses of CPS, you will eventually, become more able to call upon those skills, on your own. Again, you'll get fired as the problem-solving tour guide, which is the goal.
Yes. I love that. I want to be fired as a problem-solving tour guide. Okay. Hashtag life goals here. Okay. So we talked about some specific things, but I thought that I was thinking about the things that our audience talks about when they send me emails of things that they're struggling with, but then also patients in my own practice. And so if we can talk through these things, using the model to kind of help parents understand how they may approach these different things. So the first one I hear a lot is, my kid's lying. And parents feel like this is a breach of trust, right? Like, I can't trust my kid. So is it best to make up a situation around lying for us to break it down?
I don't know. I have one with my son.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Let's do that.
So the first thing I would say, I think lying is a byproduct of traditional discipline. Like, you could watch your kid hurt another kid, and then if you say to them, "Why did you hurt that other child?" they're going to be like, "I don't know what you think you saw, but it wasn't me," because they're just trying to avoid the consequence. That's all it is, right? So you feel gaslit, right? But it's really them just trying to avoid being in trouble. So if we're not using Plan A and we're not focusing on behavior, we're much more likely to get some honest information, right? And so I got an email one Friday afternoon from my son's teacher last year in 2nd grade, and it was like one line, and it said, "Your son pushed another kid in the face at recess today." Now, mind you, we had just had this lovely parent conference where, he's a great learner, a nice friend, and all this other stuff. He's doing very well at school. And so that was all it said. And I was like, okay, so I guess this is number one for me to deal with, even though I didn't witness it, but all right. So he comes in, off the bus, and I say, I don't know who the other kid is, right? So all I can say is something at recess didn't go so well today. Now, I didn't say you hurt anybody. I didn't say anything about behavior, and I don't know anything more specific. Otherwise, I would have been more specific. And his little face fell, and I said, I'm not mad at you. You're not in trouble. I'm just asking what you might need help with. Then suddenly he looks at me, right? And you could see him making the decision, like, can I take the risk or not, right? And here he doesn't get a lot of Plan A traditional discipline, but he does at school, because that's what school does right now. I'm working on that. But so you could see him make the choice, and he realized there is no risk because I said there wasn't, and usually there isn't. And so he was honest, and he told me what happened. And thank goodness, because what I found out was on the monkey bars, and I know this friend when he told me who it was, and the friend kept telling him he was going to push my son off the monkey bars, which my son does not even like like he can't tolerate pain and even like the thought of it. So that freaked him out. He said, I tried to use my words and he just kept saying it. And I pushed him away.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let me ask you a question. Was he laughing? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, do you think, I mean, you guys have been buddies for a few years. Has he ever hurt you? No. Do you think he thought it was funny that you were getting so upset? Oh, he's like, right. He couldn't think it through. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So he needs strategies to use in that moment
Mm-hmm.
to realize that this is actually not a dangerous, this with this situation, he was not in danger. This was
Mm-hmm.
about this kid getting a rise out of him. He thought it was funny. And I said, I bet the first thing he did was jump off the monkey bars and go tell on you and think that was funny. And he was like, it's exactly what I
Yes.
right. So I was able to work with him on a strategy he needs, right? And it all started with they need to know there's no risk in telling you what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there is if, punishments are in the mix. But he already knows he shouldn't have done it. I don't have to, he knows you don't hurt people. Right. We already did that. And if I don't teach him what he needs to know, then he might do it again. So let me teach him what he needs to know and have it happen again. Right. So the lying thing is usually they think they're in trouble or trust has somehow been broken. And we need to do some reassuring that there isn't a risk in letting us know. And if we're not focused on behavior, I don't go in with you hurt somebody. I went in with something didn't work at recess. Fill me in. It's a different approach.
Okay, so this one, what I was thinking about lying, I had a teenage situation in my mind, but I love the situation that you shared. But my next thing that I get a lot of questions about is teenagers breaking curfew or being late or just generally breaking the rules, and lying sometimes can coincide with that, right? They're late for curfew. So they're like, oh, I ran out of gas and I had to stop at the gas station, right? Like, and so then comes a story or, I fell asleep or whatever, which, sometimes it's true. But talk to me about this teenagers either being late or not making curfew. How would you handle that?
Yeah, I think the lying is for the same reason. Like they know they're late. They know they could get in trouble. They could lose the ability to go out for a few days or a week or something. And they're trying to avoid that, right? But they know what they did was not okay. That's not in question. What we need to find out is what's hard about you getting in by 10 o'clock or whatever the curfew is. What's hard about it? I'm not mad at you, right? I'm not even saying you have to get in at 10 in this moment. I'm just asking you what's hard about getting in at 10. Like what isn't working for you, right? Let's think about just last night. Well, last night, I didn't expect, but so-and-so dropped by and I hadn't seen him in a long time. And, so you want to hear all the reasons so that you might not think they're important, but they are to your kid.
Yeah.
Just like your reason for the 10 o'clock curfew is not important to your kid. That's okay. It doesn't have to be. There's something important to your kid. There's something important to you. And you're trying to marry that. Right. And figure out how to bridge it. Right. And so, and this is teaching them collaboration. This is teaching them working together with somebody who might not see the situation the same way you do and figuring out how do we come together on this.
Yes.
What's really interesting is when you work to meet your kid's concern, even if it's not important to you, they then will work to meet your concern, even if it's not important to them, which is really nice.
Well, and I'm thinking about, so there's a family that I work with in mind, and I had talked to the mom about, being more curious about using this model and being more curious about what was getting in the way of their kid getting home on time. And she talked to me a couple weeks ago and was like, oh my gosh, this is working so well. What I did was we talked about like what they were going to do and what time they thought they could reasonably be home at. And then I could talk about if that met my expectation or not. And then if it didn't, we could, like, hey, I do actually need you to be home at 10 because you have softball tomorrow morning. That's, what I'm setting this reason as. And not that you always have to have a reason, but I think, sometimes you can be adjusting of the expectations. I guess that's something that parents will complain to me about. But anyways, the daughter was able to, the mom set like a 9 o'clock on this one day, was like, okay, so you think you'll be home by 9? Okay, great. And she goes, do you know what time my daughter was home at? I was like, no, what time? 8 o'clock. She was home at 8. She had finished all she needed to do and was home at 8. And I was like, that's amazing. Did you celebrate that? Like that, did you like pay attention to how well that had gone and how much you appreciated that? And she was like, I did. And that mentality around working together has really transformed their parenting relationship. But so I was going to say, parents will say like, okay, well, if I give an inch, they'll take a mile, right? So if I say, we work together and we agree on this, I think, with the traditional plan A parenting, we're going to be like, okay, well, we set the curfew, like our curfew should be the same every night without exception. I mean, is that best for kids, like to set the expectation and not be flexible around it?
I think consistency is overrated and it's hard to do because there might be something going on that even you would be like, even you yourself would be like, oh, that seems like we would want to flex for that reason. But now you can't because you've decided that it's one, right? And, the plan A stuff is because I said so, right?
Yeah.
The plan B is about because I'm worried that you won't have enough sleep and you've got softball tomorrow at school. And so it's a health thing, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we address my health concern? Or how do we address my worried about your safety? Or how do we address the fact that I have trouble staying awake and I need sleep for tomorrow, right? Which is also very valid. Yes. So you have your concerns, I have mine. We got to meet them both. And there's a way to meet them both. We just need to be creative about it. So I think embrace the gray. There's a lot of reasons why you might shift something that makes sense to you, still addresses your concern, but it makes sense to you, right? That you can see it's reasonable. So I think, like curfew, there's probably a baseline of what you're after because of the sleep and health, right? There's probably a baseline curfew. And then, circumstances might dictate earlier. Because things change, right? Like maybe there's a tournament really far away. And so now 9 o'clock doesn't make sense. Maybe 8 o'clock makes sense because we got to get up at 6. And usually we don't get up till 8 or whatever. So either way, I think flexibility is important and being responsive is important.
Well, and it made me just think about also like when you're parenting, I think sometimes we like having like standard expectations of like, this is the expectation of your behavior. But if my kid is getting ready to leave, none of mine drive yet, but if my kid's getting ready to leave, that would be a good time to talk about proactively what the expectation is instead of just leaving it at our curfew's at 9 or our curfew's at 11 or whatever it is. I want to know what my kids are doing, like where they're going to be, who they're going to be with, and we can set expectations around them letting us know if plans change. And they're going to be likely to tell us what changes if we have this collaborative relationship where we're there to help them be successful. Because ultimately, I think that is parents' goal. Every parent, even if you're using plan A parenting, like you want your kid to be successful. That is really the goal. You don't want your kid to rely on you for their entire lives. We want them to become independent and feel good about what they're doing. So I think that part makes sense to just have a conversation proactively before they leave too about like these are the plans for this day. So just don't leave it up to chance. Cause I think sometimes we are busy doing something else and forget to have that piece of the conversation. Okay. So talk about siblings fighting. How do we work on conflict between siblings? Cause this is a huge one that I hear.
Sure. And, disagreements don't always have to lead to conflict, but when they're struggling to access skills to handle disagreements, that's when they lead to conflict.
Yes.
So it's a great opportunity for some skills work, right? Again, you would take some examples, specific examples of the thing that seems to cause the conflict, whether it's agreeing to what to watch on TV, or whether it's one sibling always wins at the game and the other doesn't, or something like that. Some very specific examples. You're going to talk to them one at a time. And this isn't a model you have to just do one-on-one. You could, if it's not going to keep either sibling from talking, you can talk to them together using this model. And you're showing them live, how do you actually work through a difference of opinion, right? But if it's too hot and you can't do that, that's all right. Talk to one over here, gather their information in the first step, hit pause, go over to the other one, gather their information, right? Then you can share with each other their perspectives, even if they're not in the same room. You can add yours into the mix, and then, work on a solution that works for everybody, right? And so sometimes that beginning step one, you need to do separately. Maybe you can bring them together after that, or maybe not yet. What we find is that if you need to play the go-between because it's too hot to put them together, eventually, after some problems get solved as the go-between, it isn't too hot to put them together because they're realizing that each is, where each and the other is coming from, right? I'm coming up with so many stories, but I know we probably don't have time, but really effective tool for helping siblings work through conflict, and great practice and experience, because conflict certainly exists outside your home, right?
Yes.
Or it can, right? We need to learn to resolve disagreements without advising.
Yes. Well, and if our kids decide to get married or become parents themselves, we're giving them all these skills, and most people need jobs. So these are things that you're going to have to navigate. And if we can have them be able to tolerate somebody else's expectations or desires, and then also their own, and find a way to come to an agreement, that is an amazing lifetime skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
Applicable across many environments.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so let's talk about bedtime battles, because I know that for me personally, this is one that we struggle with at our house. Is we can put the kids to bed on time, exactly the same time every night, doing the same thing, and then one of my kids will not stay in their bed, right? And it's we talk through it, and this is one that has been hard for us to address. So will you walk me through how to solve this problem in my own house, please?
Sure. Well, we would first, it's the wording, right? Is it whatever your expectation is? Is it difficulty staying in your bed after lights out at 8 or whatever it is? I would just put the detail in there. And now I need to listen. I'm asking the kid, what is hard about this? Because they know it, because they've heard you say it over and over, right? So what's hard about it? What are you finding challenging? And I'm listening, because I think sleep's an interesting one, right? And I struggle with it too, to an extent, because I'm somebody who needs a lot to function. Yes. And so I'm assuming that my kids need a lot to function, and they actually might not. Although you can feel it right now that I'm pretty entrenched in you got to have a lot of sleep. But I do remain open to kind of hearing if they're not feeling tired at that time and yet are functioning fine the next day, that's something to pay attention to and listen. But I want to hear from them. What is it like? Is it that they're getting scared by something? Is it that they don't feel tired? Is it that they're worrying about something? What is making it so hard to stay in the bed when lights go out at 8 p.m. Right. And I'm just listening and asking neutral, non-judgmental questions until I understand it. I want that okay moment. Now I get it. Right. And then I'm going to say in the second step, what's important to me about it. Right. And maybe there's a health concern around enough sleep and functioning the next day. Maybe it's also how this problem's impacting the rest of the house. I want to make sure that the house is calm and quiet so everybody can get to sleep who needs to get to sleep on time. Right. Whatever it might be. And now we're going to work to handle both sets of concerns. We had this issue on the other end with my son waking up very early, and then not realizing how much noise he was making and waking us up. Yes. So, I'm not mandating that he lay in his bed, quietly until 6:45 a.m. But you can do things, they just need to be quiet things because other people are sleeping. And so now he has his things that he can do, or he might even pre-plan. This is actually new that I've seen him doing. Now he's pre-planning the night before and like bringing something upstairs that just in case he wakes up early, he can use, and then we're not interrupting other people's sleep, right? And so it could be for both ends, but it's, it's really kind of understanding what's hard about meeting this expectation. Fill me in because I'm confused and I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I think, it's really taking the time to hear that piece. And sometimes I don't like when I think about, there's one particular kid I have that struggles with this. And sometimes the things she tells me about like what keeps her from going to sleep, I'm like, seriously? Like that just doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But I don't say that out loud. That's my internal voice saying that. And I think I probably need to regulate to that piece of like, that's an important part for her, even though it's not important for me, and that we can come to an agreement of how we can stay in our room quietly and what ideas we can do. So it would be okay to be like, okay, here are some coloring books that you can do. Here's, you have books you can read. You can do Legos in your room or whatever, as long as I'm okay with that. And that helps her to meet whatever the space is that she has. If we can come together in that, I'm not creating a monster by allowing my kid to do different things in their room, right?
You're being responsive to who you have, right?
Yes.
Like, with 4 kids, I'm guessing you kind of went, all right, these are our expectations, but now you have 4 different people.
Yes.
Right. And so there needs to be some flexing and understanding. It's kind of like if you go to a doctor and all they do is prescribe penicillin, but you have a broken arm and you go in and they go, oh, sorry to hear that. Here's your penicillin prescription. That's not what you need. You're being responsive. And it's a great conversation to have with your kids too, as I do with my own. Like I have 2 different kids who need different things from me. And I'm always saying, no, it's not that I'm favoring you. It's that this is something he needs. You don't seem to need that. But when you need something that he might not need, and I have lots of examples on both sides. And so they are finally getting it and don't complain about it anymore because I'm being responsive to who you are as individuals.
Yes.
Right. It's like in the education system with individualizing instruction, because not everybody learns the same. It's the same thing, right? So if we stick with our concerns, like we are concerned about our kids feeling good, being healthy, having enough energy for the next day. So how do we meet that given what they're saying? My mind races, for the first hour and it drives me crazy. Okay, so what do we do about that also makes sure you have, you're feeling good, you're healthy, you have energy for the next day. What do we do? And it might be different than what the other siblings are doing because they're not having the same struggle.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yes. Okay, Kim, this has been so amazing. Thank you so much for coming today and talking to us about the CPS model.
I appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, Kim. That was so great. I mean, I hope that the audience is ready to really implement this set of tools and to learn more. Visit their website at livesinthebalance.com or check out our resources in the show notes. With that, I will say, please subscribe to our show. It really helps us out. If you guys are subscribing to our show, it's super easy. Just go to the corner of whatever platform you use. There should be some buttons at the top right side that will say follow the show. Please do that for us. And also, if we have done something that you feel like is really meaningful, will you share this episode with a friend? We would greatly appreciate it because we want to help as many families and as many people as we can. And with your help, we can reach all those people that need the information that you're listening to today. With that, I will say have an amazing day and we'll see you next week. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, Yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.